My mother didn't even blink when she said it. She just stood there in the doorway holding her mug like she was delivering the weather report. "Ray, it's already settled. Your sister's going on the trip. Taking two would stretch the budget, and you know how things are." And her voice had that practiced softness she used whenever she expected me to swallow something painful without making a sound. I felt something tilt inside my chest, not dramatic, just a small, final shift, like the hinge on a door that's been opened and closed too many times. For 27 years, I'd been the reliable one, the girl who stayed late, picked up bills that weren't hers, bought groceries with money nobody ever asked how I earned, the girl who filled every gap the moment it appeared. Somehow they still looked at me like furniture that moved itself. Mom kept talking about logistics and reservations while my sister modeled vacation outfits in the hallway mirror, spinning like this was her world and we were just extras in it. And I found myself studying the house the way you study a room you already know you're leaving, noticing which things I bought, which things I repaired, which things they praised without remembering who paid for them. When Mom finished her little speech, she added the line she always used when she wanted me quiet, "You'll understand," and for the first time in my life, the words didn't land the way she meant them to. They didn't soothe me, they didn't pressure me, they didn't fold me back into the shape she preferred. They just echoed, sharp and hollow, like tapping a cracked glass. I smiled, but it wasn't the kind of smile they recognized, and they didn't notice. They never notice. They were too busy celebrating their plans to realize that I was finally making one of my own. A plan that didn't include shrinking myself to make room for everyone else. They thought they were leaving me behind for a week, but by the time they came home, they'd be returning to a house rearranged by the silence they'd left me in, a house missing more than they ever imagined, including the version of me they thought would never walk away. Have you ever been treated like the placeholder in your own family, the one they assume will always stay because you've never left before? I used to think breaking points were loud, but mine was quiet, a single moment where understanding finally meant letting go. I was washing dishes in my sister's kitchen when Mom made the announcement, her voice carrying that soft, decisive tone she used whenever she'd already chosen winners and losers, and I guess I should have felt something, anger maybe. But mostly I felt the warm water running over my hands as she said, "There's limited space this year. Ray, your sister will take the extra ticket," and Lila didn't even look up from her iced coffee. She just stirred it like the conversation had nothing to do with whether I mattered. "Wait, what do you mean limited space?" I asked, not confrontational, just confused, because for 27 years I'd been included in everything whether I wanted to be or not, and Mom gave me this gentle half-smile like she was doing me a kindness, saying, "Sweetheart, you've got work and rent and all that stress. This trip would overwhelm you." And the way she said it sounded almost rehearsed, like she'd practiced softening the blow before delivering it, and Dad stood behind her adjusting his jacket, pretending he didn't hear any of it. Lila finally glanced at me then, brushing her hair back like a commercial actress, saying, "It's not a big deal, Ray. There wasn't enough room, that's all," and something about her tone made my stomach tighten, this little twist of something sharp. Not jealousy but recognition, a realization that this wasn't spontaneous at all, that they'd made the plan days ago, maybe weeks, and just never thought to tell me because they assumed I'd accept it the way I accepted everything, quietly, politely. Almost invisibly. "Mom, I already asked my manager for time off," I said, drying my hands while trying to keep my voice light, but Mom waved it off gently, saying, "You can cancel it, they'll understand," and I wished she could hear how that sounded. Like my life existed only in the negative space of theirs, something that could be rearranged without consequence, and Lila walked past me to find her sunglasses, humming this cheerful tune that made the whole moment feel surreal. "What changed?" I asked, still trying to understand, still trying to give them the benefit of the doubt, but Mom was already gathering her purse, saying, "Nothing changed, honey. This is just how the numbers worked out," and Dad patted my shoulder on the way out. This awkward, distracted touch, saying, "We'll bring you back something nice," as if souvenirs could fill the space that had suddenly cracked open between us, and the kitchen felt colder the moment they stepped outside. I stayed there a moment longer, staring at the empty doorway, hearing the front door close downstairs, and the silence felt thick, like something heavy settling in my chest, and when Lila came back in wearing her oversized hat, she said, "Don't make this weird, Ray. It's just a trip," but there was a flicker in her eyes, something like guilt or something like victory. I couldn't tell, and I didn't trust myself to answer, so I just nodded while she breezed past me, leaving the scent of her perfume in the air. When their car pulled away, the apartment suddenly felt like a place I didn't recognize, and I rinsed the last dish even though it was already clean, just to have something to do with my hands. And my phone buzzed with a text from my manager reminding me the holiday request had already been approved, and for a second I imagined messaging back, saying never mind, change of plans. But instead I turned the phone face down and listened to my pulse thudding in my ears. On the bus ride home, the city lights blurred past the window, and I kept replaying Mom's voice, that soft, careful tone meant to cushion the blow, and I wondered when exactly I'd become the person they assumed wouldn't mind being left behind. And the thought stayed with me as I unlocked my apartment, this strange, steady clarity settling over me. Not anger, not revenge, just an understanding that the trip wasn't the beginning of something, but the confirmation of something that had been happening for years, quiet and unnoticed until that moment in the doorway. The apartment felt too still that night, like the silence was waiting for me to catch up with everything I hadn't reacted to yet, and I kept replaying the moment in Lila's kitchen, the way she didn't even pause to see if I was okay. And I found myself opening my banking app more out of distraction than suspicion, scrolling past the usual tiny balance, until a line of unfamiliar withdrawals caught my eye, small at first, spaced evenly, rhythmic almost, and the kind of pattern that doesn't happen by accident. I stared at the screen, whispering, "What is this?" Not expecting an answer, tapping one withdrawal, then another, each labeled under a vague processing description. And something cold spread through my stomach because the dates lined up perfectly with my parents' mortgage schedule, and I tried so hard to give them the benefit of the doubt, tried to remember if I'd ever agreed to help. But all I could recall was the time after Dad's surgery when he'd used my account for medical bills, and I'd never removed his access because I trusted him completely. I called him right away, pacing my living room with the screen glowing in my palm, and when he answered with his usual cheerful, "Hey kiddo," I softened for a second, thinking maybe this was a glitch, maybe the bank made a mistake, but when I asked, "Dad, are you using my account for your house payments?" the hesitation on the line was small but sharp, and he exhaled like I'd caught him doing something harmless, saying, "It's all family money, Ray, you know that," in a tone meant to soothe, not explain. "Dad, I didn't even know," I said, trying to keep my voice steady as I sat down on the edge of my bed, and he chuckled lightly, saying, "Sweetheart, we've been doing this for a while. It's automatic, you barely notice it." And the words felt like a soft punch because I did notice. I noticed every missing dollar, every skipped meal, every quiet compromise I'd made while believing I was taking care of myself, not covering a mortgage on a house I wasn't even welcome to celebrate Christmas in. "Why didn't you ask me?" I whispered, staring at the peeling paint near the window, wishing he could see how stunned I looked, and he replied, "We didn't want to bother you. You're so busy." The kind of answer that sounds thoughtful on the surface, but lands with a hollow thud underneath, and I pressed my fingers against my temple, trying to understand how something this big could be treated like a casual oversight, and he added, "We'll pay you back eventually," as if that erased years of invisible taking. After the call ended, I sat there for a long time, phone still warm in my hand, the edges of the room blurring as a quiet ache rose behind my ribs, not dramatic, just weary, and I replayed Mom's smile from earlier. The softness she used when she denied me the trip, and I wondered how many decisions had been made gently at my expense without me realizing. How many little exclusions had built up into this moment where I was footing their bills while simultaneously being treated as the family afterthought. A message buzzed from Lila then, a single line that read, "Hope you're not upset about today," paired with a heart emoji that felt strangely dismissive, and I stared at it without responding, imagining her sitting in her cozy bedroom surrounded by plants and string lights, oblivious to the fact that I'd just learned I'd been paying part of her comfort for years, and the strange thing was, I didn't feel angry exactly, just hollow. like something essential had been scooped out quietly through. Moments like this. That night, I opened my closet and pulled out a suitcase, not because I planned to go anywhere yet, but because something inside me understood that staying the same wasn't an option anymore, and as I folded clothes slowly, methodically, the city lights flickered through my blinds, casting moving shadows on the floor, and I realized with a strange calmness that the trip wasn't the beginning of the problem. It was simply the moment I finally saw the full outline of what had been happening for years, a truth too large to unsee now. The morning their plane lifted into the sky, I stood in my apartment with the sunlight sliding across the floor, feeling strangely weightless as I folded the last sweater into my suitcase. And the soft hum of the city seeped through the walls while my mind replayed Dad's voice from the night before, that easy reassurance he used whenever he wanted me calm. And something inside me whispered that this was the moment to loosen every tie I'd been holding onto far too tightly, a quiet unraveling, rather than an explosion. I spent the afternoon at the leasing office, signing forms while the receptionist typed quickly, her nails clicking in a rhythm that almost felt soothing, and when she asked, "Are you sure you don't want mail forwarded?" I shook my head gently, saying, "I'm starting fresh." And she nodded like she'd heard versions of that sentence from countless tenants before me, her expression softening as she handed me the confirmation papers, and holding them felt like holding a small, fragile permission slip to step out of the version of myself my family had grown used to. The phone company was next, a small storefront tucked between a laundromat and a bakery, and the clerk, a young guy with tired eyes, said, "New number, new carrier, easy," while entering my information, and he didn't ask for reasons, didn't pry. Just slid the new SIM card across the counter and said, "Fresh starts are underrated," with a half smile, and I walked out feeling strangely light, the air smelling faintly of warm bread, thinking about how many years I'd kept the same number waiting for people who rarely called unless they needed something. At home, I sat cross-legged on the floor with my laptop open, cursor blinking as I logged into the banking portal, heart slowing to a steady rhythm while I clicked through the settings and found the automatic transfer Dad had mentioned. And my fingers hovered only a second before selecting cancel, the system asking if I was sure, asking if I wanted to notify the other party, and I quietly selected no notification, feeling something gentle but firm settle inside me as the confirmation appeared, like an internal door closing with a soft, decisive click. That evening, I ate takeout noodles by the window, watching headlights sweep across the street below, and my mind drifted back to small memories I'd overlooked, like the time Mom used my credit card points without asking, saying she assumed I wasn't using them. Or the way Lila always picked group restaurants based on her preferences even when I'd said I couldn't afford them, and each memory felt like a puzzle piece clicking neatly into place, revealing a picture I'd been too close to recognize. Until now. Around midnight, I got a message from my manager asking if I planned to use the approved holiday days, and I typed out a response, paused, then deleted it, instead placing the phone on the windowsill and watching the glow fade from the screen. And for the first time in a long while, I wasn't worried about what anyone expected from me, wasn't calculating how my choices would ripple through my family, just sitting in the quiet, the radiator clicking softly behind me as the city settled into its nighttime pulse. 2 days later, I moved into the new space, a small studio with scuffed hardwood and a window that overlooked a courtyard full of mismatched patio furniture, and as I carried the last box in, the landlord, a woman with silver hair and kind eyes, said, "Give it time. Places warm to you once you live in them," and her words followed me as I set my suitcase down, the air smelling faintly of dust and possibility, and I realized I hadn't told a single person where I'd gone, not even friends who might have understood. That first night in the new apartment, I lay on the mattress on the floor, listening to a distant dog barking and someone's music drifting faintly through the vents, and as sleep crept closer, a quiet certainty settled in my chest. Something softer than triumph and steadier than fear, a feeling that I wasn't running away from my family, but simply stepping out of the shadow I'd lived in for years, and in that dim room with unpacked boxes stacked like small monuments, I understood this was the Beginning of a life where I finally felt present. They landed on a gray Thursday morning, the kind where the clouds sit low enough that everything feels hushed, and I was at my new place unpacking plates when my old phone, the one now tucked in a drawer, buzzed once before dying completely. And even though I couldn't see the message, I imagined Mom stepping into the house still wrapped in beach air, calling out for me the way she always did when she needed something, her voice rising slightly when she didn't hear an answer. At that same moment, miles away, she probably checked the mail basket by habit, expecting coupons and credit statements, instead finding a crisp envelope from the bank with language she didn't fully understand, the kind that makes people say, "That can't be right," and Dad likely reached for his glasses, tapping the page with 2 fingers while muttering, "It must be a mistake," the words tumbling out before either of them dared consider anything else, their footsteps loud in the entryway while Lila dragged her suitcase across the floor, humming absently. I didn't know any of this yet. I just felt the stillness inside my new apartment as I rearranged a small pile of silverware, letting the forked tines clink quietly. When my manager called asking if I was okay because my mother had phoned the store in a panic trying to reach me, and her voice, usually patient, carried a tremor when she said, she sounded worried, "Ray, is everything all right?" And I hesitated before answering, saying softly, "I'm okay," because it was the truth, and speaking it out loud felt unexpectedly grounding. Meanwhile, at their house, I pictured Lila leaning over the kitchen counter scrolling through her phone, her expression tightening as she said, "Her number's disconnected, I tried twice," and Mom snapping, "What do you mean disconnected?" While Dad checked the router because he always blamed technology first, and the 3 of them moving through familiar rooms with unfamiliar tension, each looking to the other for reassurance they couldn't quite give, the unease spreading like a draft through a house that had never felt cold when I lived there. The real unraveling must have started when Dad logged into the mortgage portal, expecting the usual green checkmark beside the payment, only to find a red warning banner stretched across the screen. And I could almost hear the sharp inhale he always made when something didn't align with his expectations, his chair scraping the tile as he said, "Ray didn't pay it," a sentence spoken with confusion rather than accusation, and Mom replying too quickly, "Of course she did, she always does," before the meaning of that slipped out and startled even her. I carried a box of books across my new living room then, the window cracked open enough that the breeze fluttered the edges of a bookmark, and I sat on the floor stacking novels in uneven towers, letting my mind rest in the quiet of the moment, unaware that Mom was standing in her kitchen holding her phone with both hands, staring at the failed payment message as if blinking might make it disappear, her voice small when she said, "Why would she stop it?" and Lila answering, "Maybe she forgot," even though she didn't sound convinced. Later that afternoon, I walked to the corner market for pasta and a carton of milk, the cashier greeting me with a warm nod, and on my way back, kids were chalking the sidewalk with bright looping shapes, their laughter filling the air in a way that made the world feel gentle again, and I breathed in the simplicity of it, while at home my sister was scrolling through her messages trying to find a thread, any thread, that explained my absence. Her brow pulled tight as she whispered, she didn't even say goodbye. By evening, their living room lights glowed against the front yard, shadows pacing behind the curtains as they spoke in clipped sentences, trying to map out where I might have gone, and the irony lingered softly around them. That it was only when something they depended on disappeared that they realized I was missing too, while I sat on my mattress eating buttered pasta from a bowl, listening to the murmur of my neighbors through the walls, feeling a strange, warm clarity that this was the first time in years I wasn't lost to myself. 3 weeks slipped by quietly, the kind of days that melt together when you're settling into a new space, and I was learning the small rhythms of the building, the creak near the bathroom door, the neighbor who played piano at odd hours, the soft hum of the courtyard lights turning on at dusk, when a message popped up from an old coworker saying, "Your mom came by today." She looked shaken, and something in me tightened, not from fear but from the sudden awareness that whatever was happening back home had finally reached its breaking point. I imagined them at the kitchen table, Daylight falling across the papers Dad kept shuffling, the red stamp glaring from the eviction notice they'd just opened, and I could almost see Lila's expression shifting from irritation to disbelief as she said, "This can't be right, Dad. It says 3 months overdue," while Mom pressed her palm to her forehead, whispering, "How did this happen?" And the room must have felt smaller than usual, the air too still, the kind of stillness that hangs over a family trying to pretend everything isn't unraveling. In my apartment, I was stirring a pot of soup when the thought drifted through my mind that they were probably trying to contact every number they still had for me, their messages bouncing into the quiet, unanswered space I'd left behind. And the realization felt strange, gentle even, because for once their urgency wasn't about a holiday or a favor or a forgotten errand. It was about something they couldn't control, something they never expected to fall apart. And I stood there a moment letting the steam warm my face. Across town, I pictured Dad pacing, his hand clutching the notice, saying, "Ray always handled this. She never missed a payment." The sentence slipping out before he realized what it revealed, and Mom snapping, "She didn't handle it. We just let her." Her voice thin with confusion, and Lila leaning against the counter chewing her lip as she muttered, "Maybe she changed banks." Even though the uncertainty in her eyes said she knew this wasn't about banking errors, this was about something they'd missed entirely, something they'd ignored until now. My coworker messaged again. "Your mom asked if you were having money problems," and I laughed softly in my kitchen, stirring the soup slowly, realizing they still saw me through the same narrow window, the girl who struggled quietly, the girl who would never step away without explaining herself. And I set the spoon down, listening to the soft bubbling in the pot, letting the familiarity of the moment settle around me, the warmth, the quiet, the knowledge that my life wasn't collapsing the way they assumed. It was simply changing shape. At their house, the three of them probably gathered around the dining table, the eviction notice lying between them like something alive, and Mom clutching her phone with both hands whispering, "Why didn't she tell us anything?" While Dad rubbed his jaw the way he always did when he was thinking too hard, and Lila scrolled through old messages from me, rereading them like they were clues, her expression softening as she whispered, "She never asked for help," and I wondered if she realized how often I'd tried to ask without using words. As night fell, I opened my window to let in the cool air, listening to distant laughter from the courtyard as neighbors returned home, their lives moving with easy patterns, and I leaned my elbows on the sill, feeling the soft brush of the breeze against my arms, thinking about how strange it was that something so quiet, something as simple as stepping away, could create such a storm elsewhere. And I didn't feel satisfaction or guilt, just a steady calmness, like I'd finally aligned myself with a truth I'd avoided for years. Later that evening, as I curled up on my mattress with a second bowl of soup, I imagined the envelope lying on their table under the dim kitchen light, the red lettering stark against the wood, saying all the things I'd never been able to say out loud. And the house that once felt too controlling now echoing with unanswered questions, each one circling back to the daughter they'd assumed would always stay, always bend, always return, while I rested in a place that finally felt like mine, breathing evenly, belonging quietly to myself.